Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Glasgow Film Festival 2020 Q&A. My name's Paul Gallagher. I'm the program manager from GFT. Really delighted to be here with writer-director Ben Sharrock and actor Amir El-Masry. They're the director, writer, and star, respectively, of Limbo, which I'm hoping you've just watched. So we're going to talk about the film. We are going to talk about the film to an audience who have seen it. So if for any reason you're watching this Q&A and you haven't seen Limbo, press pause, go and watch it, and then come back. Okay, so with that said, guys, it's a pleasure to have you here at Glasgow Film Festival. Welcome, although, Amir, we can obviously see you are not in Glasgow. Where are you today?
It's a little bit sunnier where I am. I'm in Egypt at the moment.
All right, and we can see that.
Spending my lockdown here, yeah.
Okay. And Ben, where are you coming from today?
I'm in Edinburgh.
All right. A bit close to home.
A bit closer, yeah.
Well, Ben, let's start. This is a very intentionally crafted film, I felt, from the precision of the camera work to the specific location, even to the characters who all feel very specifically formed. And I wondered, was it a story that came to you kind of fully formed, or was it pared down from various ideas?
I think it was really something, it was the writing process for the film, it took quite a long time. And I think where that started really going back was, which I think really is the way that it works for me, is that I get very interested in a subject, and then I kind of figure out how to approach that subject with my sensibility as a filmmaker and how to make a film about that in an interesting way, and usually from an oblique angle. And in this case, it was the sort of broad subject of the refugee crisis that really attached itself to me. And that's sort of something that goes back quite a long way, that started out my undergraduate degree before I went into filmmaking, which was in Arabic and politics. And I spent a year as part of my degree living in Damascus, studying at Damascus University. And then after that, when I returned, I started to specialize in Middle Eastern cinema. And that's really what kind of then made me decide that I wanted to go to try and be a film director. And then I specifically at that point started, my dissertation was on Arab and Muslim representations in American cinema and TV. So then kind of flash forward, I was then in film school, and we had a short film project that was set in the Sahrawi refugee camps in southern Algeria. And myself and producer Rune Gortabay, who I met at film school and who's the producer of Limbo, we went out to the refugee camps and stayed with a family there and worked with an NGO on a project that was specifically about identity and how the label of being a refugee affects one's identity. And then sort of a flash forward again, when the refugee crisis became very prevalent in the media, I think I was really struck by the representation of refugees. And that's in part because of the friends that I had made in Syria that I was still in contact with, and in part from these various other, bits of my past leading up to that. And it kind of occurred to me that there was this we were experiencing this process of dehumanization of refugees. And on the one hand, you had the demonizing of refugees, and then on the other hand, you had the pitying of refugees. And we weren't really looking at these people in a way that is just as them as human beings that we can relate to. So yeah, at that point, I really knew that I wanted to write something about this subject, and I set off on a journey to do that with a big list of things to avoid. And at the top of that list was sensationalizing the subject matter, and another big thing for me was using a Western character as a vehicle to tell a story about refugees. I really wanted it to be from the perspective of the refugee characters, and I wanted it to be something that was really quite introspective and again, focusing that, really sort of distilling it down to identity, being at the core of it. So that, and then it took quite a while to write it, with a lot of work and a lot of research, and yeah.
And so obviously it's the complete opposite of what I asked then. Like I said, did it come fully formed? No, it was like a huge kind of long process. So Amir, at what point in Ben's process did you become aware of Limbo and become part of the film?
I think it was, my agent sent me the script. When was it? In 2018, it was like 4 or 5 months before the shoot date. But I know initially when I just read the blurb, I was very, very tentative to take on a subject matter that is very much current. It's so current and prevalent, and I was worried for a couple of reasons, but mainly to take on that responsibility, but also more often than not, you see films depicting the refugee crisis with a Western savior character that is the main focus of the film, and shows the refugee a better life away from home. But what Ben does amazingly is he manages to remind us constantly in the film that Omar wants to go back home, and we are depicting Syria as this beautiful, beautiful country, rich in culture, and he would rather be there than anywhere else with his family, which is a narrative that isn't so often told in the media, and I think it is important. It's an important one. But I immediately fell in love with the character and the way that tonally the story is told. I've never seen anything like it. I never saw comedy being used as a way to send such a serious message across. Not that it had an agenda or anything, but something, when you use comedy, I feel sometimes that bridges the gap between the West and the East much, much closer than it would if you kind of hammer it on someone's head, the message. I was dying to be a part of it. I told my agent, I was like, I got to be involved somehow. Let's fight tooth and nail. And so I sent a tape. I didn't hear anything for a couple of months. Kept nagging Ollie, my agent, what's going on? And then I think Ben, I might be mistaken, but I think at round about the same time, it was an amazing kind of, all the stars aligned. I think at that time Ben had seen The Night Manager or something.
I saw an image of you from The Night Manager. So at that point, and it was sort of at that point that I really kind of got in my head that Amir was our Omar, just from seeing the image of him. So going into the sort of self-tape and the audition, Amir was already in quite a strong position because I already really wanted him to be Omar. I was imagining the whole film with him. I was dreaming at night of him as Omar. And then, of course, absolutely brilliant in the audition.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it's amazing when you really want to be a part of something and everything kind of works. It rarely happens. Rarely happens rarely happens that you have that relationship with a director as well. That kind of, it was always a talking process. Not many Q&As have asked us about like our process together on set, and I think that was probably an insightful experience of knowing the weight of subject matter, but also knowing our levels. And I remember you also using this metaphor of like holding 2 buckets filled with water, and the idea that he's constantly carrying this weight, and the second you overspill, the audience have that relief, and we need to keep everything measured until that scene, which hopefully, if you guys have seen the film, the moment when he meets his brother, and you see cracks of it on the phone call with his mom, but it doesn't quite overspill until he sees his brother. yeah, and we had like Buster Keaton as a reference point as well. You know, the idea that you give nothing, but you give a lot just through doing nothing.
Yeah, the kind of the sad clown idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really fascinating to me that you mentioned the process and the relationship between the two of you, because it's the thing you've kind of highlighted already. The thing I thought about your character, about Omar, is that, and Ben, maybe you can speak to this, like, I wondered if what was on the page in terms of the character, because so much is held inside of him and so much is kind of unspoken. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that process from your perspective, Ben, of like, did you want to tell Amir everything about this character, or did you want him just to have what's on the page and kind of find him himself?
It was certainly, I think that, you know, what I try and do in my script writing is give as much detail as possible. And so I try to write that into the script and to try and give the character as much depth as possible. And I do, you know, because I'm a writer director, I write the direction into the script. So I'm also writing sort of in a way, trying to communicate how the character is feeling in moments as well in the script. So I think that we did start with a good foundation, but then, you know, we also had a really good rehearsal process as well. So we had a lot of time to go through all of that detail and go through the emotional journey of Omar. But, you know, in part of my way of working as well, while I'm kind of I can be very specific and very detailed about things, you know, working with the actors is also kind of giving Amir, you know, authority over the role and you know, sort of, you know, encouraging Amir to give detail himself to the character's backstory and you know, and really sort of delve into that kind of emotional backdrop himself. So it's sort of, and I think there's really a very strong kind of dialogue between us all the way through, and that kind of, you know, that started before the rehearsals with conversations around the character and the script and everything, then very much in depth during the rehearsals, and then all the way through the production as well. It's you know, and I think Amir, I mean, you jump in, but it's like that was I was constant, you know, we were constantly talking throughout the production. For me, I'm kind of, even if I'm sort of like, you know, 50 meters away on the monitor, I'm in between takes, I'm always going to go right up to Amir and have an intimate conversation. And
that was a real treat, to be honest. That was a real, and also considering the weather, guys, it was like, I don't know, like it came with 60 miles per hour, like wind, you know, it was very, very strong conditions. And we'd still have that time where, say, cut, and you come over, and we talk about the process and talk about the levels and stuff. And that, it happens. It doesn't happen but it doesn't happen that often. And it did feel like you gave us the kind of authority to take on our roles, but also it was a constant collaboration. It was a constant conversation about levels, and yeah, it was a real treat, kind of building this character, even as we were going along. You know, we didn't shoot consecutively as such, but we knew where to kind of like rein it in and not and kind of not overspill. Yeah, it was.
You mentioned the weather there, and I wanted to ask about the location and any particular. Well, first question is, where exactly was it that you shot, and then were there particular challenges, and just the mix that it feels so cold. You know, watching it feels like freezing. but it's so starkly beautiful as well. This mix. Anyway, my question, I guess, is where was it, and what was it like shooting there, Ben?
So we shot on the Uists. The people from US don't like me saying the US, so I'm sorry, but I can't list all. I can't. Right. There's so many islands in that chain, but it's a chain, a chain of island, and we mainly shot on North Uist, it was, we're the first feature film to ever shoot there as well, and obviously, that came, with a huge amount of challenges, and it's the furthest west island, so really very exposed to the Atlantic, and the conditions were just extremely difficult. But it's what we wanted as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But at the same time, the weather is, the weather's changing constantly. So the wind's just moving so fast. So you've got sun, suddenly it's bright sunlight, and then it's raining, and then it's, and then the mist comes in, and, so there's a lot of challenges and really brutal conditions. And we were shooting close to gale force winds a lot of the time. So we had, like 6 guys holding down the lighting stands and things like that. So it's like, sometimes it was like we had a reasonably sized crew, and as for people that have seen the film, a lot of it is very static. So we're essentially shooting on a tripod. So you're like, why do you need such a big crew if you're shooting on tripod? But of course, because of the weather, you've just got we've still got lots of things around the camera, and if we didn't have our crew, everything would just blow away as well. Apart from everything else that they brought to the film.
What was lovely is that the locals also wanted to be a part of it as well. They would want to contribute to in any way to help even hold down the lighting or anything like that. It was it was a really very, very wholesome, and like you said, Ben, I think those challenges, the extreme conditions, as sadistic as it sounds, was extremely useful. Obviously we'll never experience what the actual individuals went through, but it was at least a percentage of getting there and really understanding what it would be like to be away from home and go through these conditions.
Yeah, I think that's also that one of the things that we did was we also, with Amir and the other guys, we got them to go to the US from London by road.
Oh wow!
Really, just to see the distance, because when you fly from Glasgow, you're there in like 25 minutes, so you you don't really get a sense of how far it really is. And and I think that for Amir, for you, it's a completely different environment from what you're used to.
Yeah,
London, and I have to say, even for myself, and the reason that we ended up shooting on Uist was because I went out there to write the script, and that was. At that point, the film was set on a remote Scottish island. And I, while I'd been to some of the islands, I didn't feel like I'd really had that experience of being on a remote Scottish island. So, I went out, and I'm from Edinburgh. So I went out to Uist and stayed in a peat-fired cottage in the middle of nowhere with no signal, no Wi-Fi, and kind of hunkered down and would write the script in the mornings, and I'd drive around the island in the afternoons, looking for locations, and walking around the island just in the wind and the rain, and trying to sort of think about what Omar would be thinking, and it, I felt sort of very alienated and isolated in that environment. So
and there was no reception. There was hardly any reception. There was only one point on the island where you could get phone signal, and it was only one network. So if you really wanted to call home, you had to switch to that network.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. We had it like sometimes we'd have to call to the mainland, and there was a car park somewhere, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. But there was one bay in the car park that had the signal. So you'd have to go to that specific parking bay in order to be able to call the mainland. Yeah,
that's funny, because these are the kind of jokes that are in the film. You kind of think, oh yeah, they're kind of exaggerating. But no, it's actually really what it's like.
It's true.
And again, that's useful. It's just it's a useful thing to have to understand, what it's like to be away from home and not have that easily, readily available to be able to call home all the time.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end of our time, I think, but I wanted to ask you, I wanted to kind of acknowledge the year that we're in for cinema, and the fact that Limbo, it was part of the 2020 Cannes selection, and it was featured at Toronto Film Festival and various other festivals. It's been very successful, but these have all, as far as I know, been virtual experiences largely. And I wanted to ask about taking a film around online festivals and whether you can still feel really an audience response, and what that's like. I mean, we're at one right now.
It's been, it's something that's, I think, very bittersweet. Initially getting the film into Cannes, it's a huge deal, and for me personally, it's been an ambition of mine for a very long time. So for that to happen, but then not to experience the festival. So you're kind of like, we got in, so we did it, and that's amazing, but we don't get to experience the festival. So it's this odd thing. And then we have, gone on a great journey with the film, given the circumstances. And we've, with Toronto and then San Sebastian, and then we were online with London Film Festival. We were in Zurich. Me and Amir, we managed to go to San Sebastian Film Festival, which was great. So we were able to watch it with an audience there, but at the same time, it wasn't like the festival normally would be. So there were no events, there was no celebration. The cinema was at half capacity. That was amazing to watch it with the audience. I'm actually someone that I'm never really sure if I want to watch it with an audience or not, but I really enjoyed it in San Sebastian. But it's strange in terms of getting the audience response. To answer your question there, social media has become really valuable for that. And we got an incredible response from on Twitter from Toronto, and then from London, Cairo Film Festival. Recently, where Amir was able to go to Cairo Film Festival, and we won 3 awards there.
Congratulations!
We won, we won the best film and for Presky and outstanding contribution, which was. Yeah, it was incredible, and it was a great moment to have Ben on stage as well. Virtually, we FaceTimed him.
Yeah.
just also so Ben could see the reaction, and actually, this is an off point, but what was amazing taking it to a Middle Eastern country, the majority of them thought that Ben was Middle Eastern.
Huh.
They thought that he was Arab. They thought he was, from the region, because of all the nuances in the film, the jokes, even with the apricot, the Bukra fil Mishmish, all these little phrases and stuff were like, how does someone who's Scottish know this? They'll know this stuff. They were so surprised to see. But that was lovely to see. So yeah, needed to have him there just to see the reaction of the audience there.
Oh, that's great. Well, like you say, Ben, it's bittersweet. And similarly for us in Glasgow, we're delighted to be able to present the film to an online audience. And I know the GFF audience is very big on Twitter. So you'll undoubtedly get some great responses there as well.
So,
So I think that's our time now. We're going to wrap up now. But I am going to note that Limbo, all being well, Limbo is going to be released in UK cinemas on the 7th of May in cinemas. So, and I'm sure we are
Fingers
all,
crossed.
yes, hoping for that. We're hoping for that at GFT. And, you know, if you want to come to GFT in May, if it's possible, or really whenever it's possible, guys, you are welcome at Glasgow Film Theatre.
Thank you.
Really wish you all the best with Limbo as it continues on its journey. So thank you, Ben Sharrock, and Amir El-Masry for joining me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us.
Thanks.